right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 18th episode of The Mechanics of Poetry. There they are behind me, working hard on poetry. And today, we have a very controversial topic. A topic that's meant to give people a chance to voice their opinions. What do you feel is appropriate for poetry? I guess the appropriate subject matter for poetry. I've heard many opinions about this over the decades. I'm gonna give you a little background myself before I turn it over to my wonderful members. Back in 1996 was when I first encountered the Poetry Police. I had created a chapbook with the wonderfully controversial title, Vomiting for God. I thought that was bad enough right there. But no, a reviewer from San Francisco read my chapbook and wrote a review, a negative review. Negative because he didn't like the subjects I wrote about in that chapbook. And the editor of the magazine, based in LA, I think I can safely say his name, G. Murray Thomas, a wonderful fellow, gave me the option of, should we print it or not? Right, it was up to me. And I thought, well, yeah, there's that old adage, you know, any publicity is good publicity. That used to be true. And I don't know about nowadays, but it used to be true. I'm thinking of Rachel Nichols, man. She's gone. But back in 1996, Next Magazine, which was the poetry magazine of Southern California at that time, you know, I wanted to have the review in there, even if it was negative. And much to my pleasant surprise, the readers of Next Magazine rallied around me, saying that the reviewer from San Francisco was misguided in telling people what to write about. And then, of course, I shouldn't let the cat out of the bag. What did I write about that was lambasted by this reviewer? Well, I was a younger man back then. That was 1996. That's 25 years ago. How's that for quick math? 25 years ago. So I was, oh God. Have I got, yeah, 35. Okay, I was 35. So I was a young man. And a young family man. I had a baby girl who was maybe about 2-3 years old. And I did what many parents do, take them to the McDonald's Playland, which has since been banned, I think, because of all the germs in McDonald's Playland. I got some good poems out of that, I thought, about McDonald's. And apparently that was not the subject for poetry based on this San Francisco reviewer. He really lambasted me for writing about such sundry things as McDonald's and other sundry things I can't remember right now, because that is so long ago. I mean, I could dig up the poem. I guess I could do that just to set the standard. Everybody can read a poem if they want to. I think I have it. Let's see. Yeah, Word. Oh, what do you know? I got Word open already. I just have to go to the file. And the file is appearing shortly. Oh, this is dead time. Somebody say something. Oh, yeah. Wow, where did the file go, man? I should have prepared. I ate a sandwich instead of preparing. Here we go. Documents.
Yes. Does anybody else have any inappropriate poetry? I'm longing to hear subjects that are not appropriate to write about in poetry.
Yeah, and I'm beginning with something really reprehensible, McDonald's.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go, here we go. I am just 2 clicks away. There it is. Boy. Come on. This is a lesson to all you hosts out there. Be prepared. Don't search like me. There it is. Bringing up those files. Oh yeah, right to it. Oh yeah. I think it's safe to start screen sharing. Here I go. See, which one was that? That's number 2. Nope, it's 2. Yeah, got it right on the first go. Okay. So these are old 20th century poems, and hopefully you can see me scroll. Like I wrote about such fun topics as our refrigerator. That's pretty sundry, right? And here's a poem called McLife, one of my favorite McDonald's poems. When I finished with work and drove home, I got my McCollect call telling me to McDrive to McDonald's to McEat with my McWife and McChild. I McAte the McMeal and McDrink, but McMost of McAll, I McEnjoyed the McBreath of our McKisses. That's pretty reprehensible stuff, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it got published, you say, in a printed work?
Yeah, in a chapbook called Vomiting for God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it got past the border censors.
Oh, Mick, awesome.
Yeah. So, and then right below it is another one called McPlay. This one is a little more caustic. I take my kids to the McDonald's playland. I get to sit on sticky white plastic. I get to rest my arms on sticky white plastic. I get to watch kids find new uses for plastic. Those famous plastic McBalls in Olympic colors get tossed science lesson style toward passing sun-glinting cars. And that tubular yellow plastic slide, so great for kid punches in private. That's not the end of the poem. Then it's 3:30 p.m. and the teens come in overgrown creative bodies, climb on top of the cage to tear off pink plastic protective foam, makes cool arm shields. And good old larger than life painted plastic Mayor McCheese gets his head turned around to Main Street to plead to speeding drivers, look what they're doing to me. Well, I suck a clear plastic straw, watching cancer drain into my system. Now that was kind of presumptuous of me. I can look back on it 25 years later and say that was a bit presumptuous because I've been lucky so far. No big C. And I still occasionally drink that, what is that stuff they put in the Diet Coke? Aspartame, is that what it is? Or is that the one? Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I partook in that science experiment over the past 40 years, drinking Diet Coke occasionally, but I drink it a lot less than I used to. Only when there's no alternative. Like right now, I've got my trusty tea, Lipton tea. In the glass, this is not even a glass, it's a Tupperware, what do you call it? A Tupperware, oh, thank you for the Dr. Pepper commercial. I hope that gets past YouTube censors. Yeah, you mentioned a product, but this is Tupperware. I mentioned a product too, and this is the one of the Tupperwares that my mother bought 50 years ago so that her kids wouldn't break cups. And just a couple of weeks ago, my sister stirred me some tea in the cup and I didn't finish, so I took it home on purpose. Maybe I'll get a poem out of it. Anyway, so that's my point. Poetry is possible, I think, on any subject, but there are degrees of acceptance in the world, right? And I have only started with the softest of topics. And I'm hoping that the next member of our group is going to bring up whatever he wants to bring up. And that's Chris Askew. Go ahead, Chris.
I started thinking about this and thinking about what isn't appropriate for poetry.
Yeah.
You can see from various viewpoints, like your critic, that there are some people that think there are some things that aren't appropriate for poetry. And we also know from various limericks and writers in San Francisco in the last century that there are people who think that there are things that are appropriate for poetry that other people do not think are appropriate for poetry. So it's a little bit like what's poetry and what's not. It sort of depends on who's doing the publishing.
Yeah.
Does it answer the call or not? I think, and I searched my works for things that you wouldn't necessarily think are appropriate for poetry. And I've got a couple of fun examples. But it occurs to me that the real answer there is that what is poetry uniquely good for when we think of what subjects are appropriate to poetry? What subjects are most appropriate to poetry? We also always know that love is one of them.
There are even degrees of love, though. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's because love is something that's hard to talk about just in straight English, I suppose. And there are lots of other things that are hard to talk about or hard to describe. Things that are beautiful in general succumb to poetry pretty well. Because it's hard to just be talk flat about them. You don't want to talk flat about them. You want to evoke in your reader something of what the experience did to you. And poetry is uniquely good at that. Or let's say relative to creative prose, it takes a lot fewer words than poetry to do a good job of that, I think. Let me share a couple of things that I thought, if you think about them, are not particularly good subjects for poetry. Gallbladder surgery comes to mind. Spelling. I have a good one about spelling that you wouldn't think of, or just irrelevant facts. I'm reminded of Kay Ryan, who was a poet laureate a few years back, still is alive in Marin County. Ran into a dry spell, as though she picked up Ripley's Believe It or Not, picked odd topics and wrote poets about them. You wouldn't think more poetry about them. That's not the first place I would look for inspiration, but it worked for her. She got a book out of it. And a poet laureate ship, I guess.
Not too shabby.
I also think I've got poems about punctuation and neurological disorders. But let me give you, where to go?
Thank you for being better prepared than me. Although I kind of knew I had that in my back pocket. I just had to take it out there.
Share something here. Here is the gallbladder surgery. Medicare's laparoscopical cholecystectomy, Surgeons and nurses converse and respect of me. 3 little holes and they're in there dissecting me, making what will be a pain in the neck to me. Because when they're done, they'll be handing the check to me. Laparotypical colocastectomy.
Yeah, easy for you to say. How dare you write about such a thing? That's quite enjoyable, actually.
No, that's such a messy subject. But then, I had a lead in from President Johnson, who on public TV showed us his gallbladder scar to prove that it actually happened. And he
Oh,
wasn't
yeah. I heard about
just
that.
hiding out.
Yeah. You know Kaluki, right? Kaluki, Carl Stillwell. He had he wrote poetry about his colonoscopy. So that's definitely related to what you brought up here. But I couldn't get him on today.
Yeah, too bad.
You have another one?
Yeah. This is sort of on the more serious side, but it also says some of the benefits of poetry. This is about a neurological disorder called agnosia. As it says at the top there, it's a neurological disorder that results in an inability to recognize objects such as an apple or a key, a person smells or sounds, despite normally functioning senses. Now, poetry comes in well here, I think, because this offers some images that make an otherwise difficult topic a little easier to feel and a little easier to apply elsewhere. Agnosia. There's a place in the brain holding the map of a perceived object to its sense, the link of thing to thought. When broken, for example, by stroke or trauma, there's often no fuss, no drama. What was simply now is not, or is other. The apple in the hand winks, dissembles, now a star fruit, now a rambutan, exotic and strange, yet seductively solid and real. In our minds, the map of deed to principle may too be sundered by trauma or abuse of power. No flash, no thunder. Cupidity is fiscal responsibility. The towering lie is truth in the ear or in the voting booth. Compassion and common sense dance desperately by, but find no place to hang their meaning.
Wow.
And there's one more I'd like to share. I think many of you have heard this, but it gives a better idea of even what simple poetry is good at.
Chris, that was downright educational. I knew nothing about this, and this poem taught me quite a lot. So thank you.
Well, good.
Yeah. That's a purpose right there.
This is the flip side. It's an odd subject, but it's also making use of what poetry has to offer, the tools of poetry, to make it more sympathetic, to talk about something that would otherwise be difficult to talk about. This one's called I Dug a Grave Today.
Oh, yeah.
I dug a grave today for a dog that's still alive. The ground was thawed and soft from 2 days' rain. Surgery on my shoulder, then 6 months before I swing a pick again. I don't expect the dog to last that long. It's my girlfriend's dog, 14 years old, blind, deaf, and near incontinence. I'm not attached. It treats me like a stranger, except at feeding time. I don't want to foster gender roles, but as a man, I feel it's mine to dig the graves and do the necessary killing and keep it to myself. She doesn't need to know that there's a grave ready. I'm not attached to graves. I'm not in one place long enough. I sometimes just bag up the corpse and take it to the vet school. They welcome them for would-be vets to practice on. But she needs a grave. She needs a focus for her grief. She needs a place to go and sit and remember and cry, like the bench on the porch I made her from the branches of a birch that fell, where she'll go and sit and remember and cry when I'm gone.
Whoa. Heavy subject dealt with very well.
The just to sort of wrap that up, you saying I'm giving you things that are not good subjects, like a gallbladder object that you can poke fun of. And there's a world of limericks out there that say interesting things about subjects that are not particularly, let's say, good for polite conversation.
Yeah.
But what
Crazy
is good for
limerick.
poetry can be even something like digging a grave for your dog, because it's easier to talk about all the stuff that goes with digging a grave for your dog in poetry than it is in any other way, at least doing it so you bring out some of the feelings that are associated with it and the scope of the concerns that go with it and so on. That's what I
Well, every poem tends to remind me of another poem. And in this case, what you've written about, what you've done is create a poem where the subject is not beautiful, right? Its ugliness is beautiful, if you put it that way. That's the modernism, the idea of modernism, that ugliness can also be beautiful. And there's the poem that comes to mind right away for me is the one by Charles Bukowski about his cat. And as the provocative title, he was a tough motherfucker. But the poem itself is really a loving description of some pretty graphic illness that the cat had. So, and then your examples also made me think of one more thing, and then I got to move on to our next member. And that is that there seem to be a couple schools of thought in terms of what's appropriate in terms of the poem itself. Is it a narrative poem or is it a lyrical poem? And some editors favor lyrical over narrative and some narrative over lyrical, right? So there's just all things are possible. You just got to find the right editor. And on that happy note, I'm heading over to someone who is publishing. Let's see, we got to close the screen share there real quick so I can see who I'm introducing. There you go, Chris. Go ahead and close that screen share. Yeah. Now I can see. Oh, yeah. There he is. Yeah. This fellow has a new book coming out. And if you know anything about his poetry, he's unafraid to talk about exactly what's on his mind. And it takes him on a lot of journeys. One of them has been that he's accidentally uncovered a new format for publishing your poems called the poetic libretto, shorter than a chapbook, longer than a broadside. And then he got the offer to publish a book. So what did he do? He put together 5 poetic librettos to make a book, and it's coming out very soon. So to talk about this subject and that, Marvinlouis Dorsey, here he is. Applauso.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, the libretto book should be coming out soon. That should be fun. I didn't expect that. But it's funny with the topic of today, the idea of what's good for poetry in my mind is me staying open to my muse. Because I can't really put it in words. How can someone tell me what's good or not good about how I'm expressing myself? So what might be offensive or inappropriate to one person, it makes no sense to me. It just makes no sense to me. I think I don't want to come off like I'm taking this poetry thing too seriously, but for me to be thought of as a poet and writing as a poet or whatever. And no, I honor that title. And I take it seriously because if the world is going to get the truth, it's only going to get it from the poets. I've said that before and I'll say it again. If I'm in a room with a politician and a poet, who am I going to think is going to give me the truth? The politician or the poet? And the only thing I can do that's good for poetry is make sure I'm open to my muse. And there's times, and most of you guys, some of you guys here know what a hard time I have reading my poetry and accepting my poetry as my muse gives it to me. Because there's been times when I've had to write something because my muse inspired me to write it. You know, I didn't want to write the book In Black Skin. You know, I didn't want to have to go out and read the book and have to say the word nigger. I didn't want to have to write a poem about living in black skin and hating the fact that someone wants to hate me and call me a nigger. But that was there, it had to be written. You know, the N-word might be offensive to some people, but that's what my experience was. If that's good for poetry, fine. If it's not, too bad. Because my job here isn't to like make you feel good. It's just to, like I said, I'm a poet. This is what I do. You know, and when I got bitten by the poetry bug, I started writing and I just never stopped. You know, and I'm not sure if I chose it or if it chose me, but I do know that I don't think there's never a place or time when I can express what I think and feel. And if people like it, they do. If they don't, they don't. If it's good for poetry, fine. If it's not, too bad.
Do you have an example of this to share with us?
No, I didn't come to.
Oh,
I
you didn't come to share. Oh man, I wanted to plug your book.
You know,
I want people to read your stuff. People got to know about this guy.
I got this, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's this one libretto.
I'd settle for that.
All right, well, here's the libretto. I got inspired by the Canyon reading. I was going to read this tonight. She had a prompt to I think the prompt was craving. So I wrote a poem and I went to read it, but I didn't want to just read one poem. So I put it in a libretto. There's 2 poems here. The first one, well, what the hell, man? You got 2 hands, don't you? One to help yourself, the other to help someone else. You got to know how to love to live. Next picture. I'm slaving over the steering wheel, a back seat. Can't keep my heart awake, my eyes from filling. Stealing away moments in this time, I get caught, only seconds remaining. I'm staining who I say is me with bad thoughts. Who says my cuts are too deep? Who says this thing inside of me is nothing more than a sick craving?
And the poet goes silent. Well, even that short sampling, I like to think anyone that hears that is going to agree with me. That's Marvin Dorsey. That's Marvin Dorsey's poetry, and there's no poet like Marvin Dorsey.
And that's all I can give to poetry. If it's appropriate or if it's good for poetry, I don't know. But
yeah, it sounds like it's becoming a situation here where it's the editor's choice. I guess that's rightly so, the editor's choice, and they have their audience, particular audience. There might be a particular audience where some subjects might be considered inappropriate if it's for children, right? You don't want to have explicit sexuality, even though we all write poems like that. Yes, go ahead, Marvin.
But I don't think as people who express ourselves, we shouldn't allow an editor to stop us from writing and reading what we have that's there to read or write. If they don't publish it, too bad for them. We got to find another way to get published there. Because if the publisher isn't going to publish my stuff because it doesn't fit into what he thinks is poetry, then I got to find another place to publish my stuff because I think it is poetry. I don't
You brought
think
up
we should leave
a
it- I don't
great
think-
issue, man. This
I
is a
don't
great
think-
issue.
I don't think we should leave it up to the publisher to
Yeah.
publish what we have.
But I think there's a responsibility for any publisher to not debase a poet based on their writing. I remember when I was, 21, I was at Cal State LA. I'd made my first submission for Statement magazine, and the editor wrote me a letter back saying I had no business writing poetry.
I think,
That is not a good editor, treating anyone like that.
I think,
My Lord.
I
Go ahead,
think,
Marvin.
I think if the publishers won't accept our stuff because it's not appropriate, then we gotta find another way to shove it down their throats. Because sometimes what we have to say is what needs to be heard.
I think it's always, yeah.
I
Well,
can-
here's what I'm gonna do. Here's what I'm gonna do, because I have to be fair time out here, and we have limited time.
Thanks, guys.
I'm gonna go to someone who I think has something to say about that. And that's Coco. What do you got to say about that, Coco?
I've got a lot to say about that.
Say it.
I call Marv the truth-telling poet because he's telling his truth, and there is nothing more powerful and more beautiful than that, and that's what makes Marv's poetry so hearty and something that you want to be a part of. As far as the topic of what makes good poetry or what should you not write about, I don't think there's anything you should not write about.
Are you an editor though? Sometimes you got to look in someone else's shoes. I'm an editor myself, but I'm
I hear
one of the
you.
more open editors, right? I'm not going to censor anybody, but
Right.
I know editors who do. Editors who, some things are off limits.
Absolutely. There are tons of editors out there who won't publish poetry that is trauma-based or trigger-based or has to deal with touchy subjects that are either political or graphic. But if you look to poetry's history, like the very beginnings of poetry, that's all poetry was mainly about, was to historically document the graphic nature of humanity, the horrors and terrible situations that there were nursery rhymes, ashes to ashes, we all fall down.
The Black
Those
Plague.
are touchy subjects, but those are subjects that humanity needs to remember, and there is nothing better than the poetic verse to do that. And so,
Yeah, that's like what Chris was talking about that earlier, right? A poem is visceral.
yeah,
It's an experience,
right,
and poetry does it best,
exactly.
right?
To those editors who aren't willing to go that distance, hey, it's everyone's prerogative. That's why we have the freedom of speech. It's one of our constitutional rights. So
Yeah, we have only so much freedom, even with that.
I hear you.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
there are editors who edit the editors, and
Yeah.
it truly depends on who you surround yourself with and finding that home, because there is a home for every piece of poetry. You're not going to always hit the right note, so to speak, with every editor. So just because your piece isn't accepted with one distribution doesn't mean that it's not good poetry. It simply means that with that particular editor, it wasn't their flavor. So,
Yeah, it doesn't match their sensibility.
right.
Yeah.
So keep pushing keep pushing that envelope and keep searching for that home because it's out there. It's out there.
There's a place for every poem. And if you look behind me, this Mechanics of Poetry logo, I've had people complain about this logo.
Really? I believe you.
Yeah. Like, how can you use that for poetry? That's inappropriate. Yeah. Okay.
You know, my poetry is very controversial, and I've heard tell that, you know, there are some poets within the community that don't want to hear about trauma, that don't want to hear about somebody's lived experiences, but that's their prerogative to not read or not be a part of it. But my poetry is my out, just like Marv. It's my rescue from all of the trauma and horrible lived experiences that I've gone through. It's my way of processing and my way of healing. And to be able to have found a community and an editor, thank God for Spectrum, that accepts and publishes those touchy subjects that I do speak about. And I was shocked when the most faved poem in this community that I'm a part of had to deal with my real-time written suicidal ideation poem, Would You Notice Me? Is one of the most celebrated from the people that I, you know, in groups that I read it with, are thankful that I wrote that piece because finally they feel like they're being heard. They feel like what their lived experience isn't out of the ordinary, isn't something that they shouldn't be feeling. To know that another human being shares in that gives them solace. So I'm going to keep writing what I write.
You know, just out of idle curiosity, you wouldn't happen to have that poem to share?
Sure, sure.
You know, I think some people would like to hear it in this poetry program for adults. That's right. On YouTube, I specifically check the box, adults only.
Well, right. This is a very touchy subject. So trigger warning. Let me see here. Okay, here we go. Would you notice me? I have this one memorized, I swear. Would you notice me? If I hung myself from a tree in front of where you live, would you notice me? Eyes bulging, feet twitching like a fish out of water? Or would the electricity of my cut live wire electrify you in guilt? What if I drown myself in your pool, floating on the water like a buoy bobbing gratuitously? Or would you just skim me out of the pool of your life? Maybe if I blew my brains out in your office, you would notice me there. Splattered against the wall like the spaghetti dinner you threw indignantly, angry at the mere insolence of my existence and pretentious dreams of acceptance. A swan dive from a tall building or suicide bridge is just too cliche. I'm not looking for a captive audience to talk me down. This isn't a cry for attention or premeditated pretense. I can swallow all my medications in one big gulp. Chase my opioid-filled happiness with sedated peace. Staggered steps, chastened breaths, foaming bubbles of rabid sadness, perhaps slitting my throat would best capture your attention. A Merlot-colored waterfall from my smiling flesh. Cold memories flood the floor of manic depression. How about if I clothe myself in plastic explosives? I am the first of 4 girls, conveniently all named with a C. Would you help me push the button to purge my soul from the tyranny of words? My confetti parts decorate everything within a 3-mile radius. What do you see in the Rorschach images along the wall? a work of art by Paul Jackson Pollock, perhaps. I think I'm feeling much better now.
Wow.
And that's a favorite. People really like that one.
I love it. Love it.
I've
Yeah.
had others that say that, my trauma is what's killing me, and that my experience shouldn't be my experience, and that I just need to get over it. And I wrote a poem about that too, and it was also very, very controversial. It's a little on the longer side though. Would it be okay to share that one?
I think you made your point, and I'm running out of time. I want to give 5 minutes to James, our last member who's going to partake today, and then I got to take off. So I'm going to give these full 5 minutes to James Coates, our cleanup hitter. Go ahead, man. Say what you will.
All right. So yeah, I guess I consider myself a love poet. And so when I think about writing, I think about coming from a perspective of love in the writing, and consideration and empathy, as a way of making sure that my work is kind of appropriate in responsibility to the craft and to the subject I'm speaking about. But poetry is about the life and the lived experience, and I don't feel like we can cage that in, because that's different for everyone. And so I tackle a lot of different things. So besides love, family, death, culture, food, environment, a lot of different things. But I do feel like there are kind of best practices when it comes to thinking about the topic and subject matter. And so I'll talk a little bit about some that I did that didn't work or kind of failed. And so like some ideas was probably, I have a poem about colonizers that not a whole lot of people were happy about, the subject in itself. And they felt that was
You piqued my curiosity.
Divisive. And but it was really like, how would the ancestors speak about the subject? And so, ancestors would definitely feel some type of way, because the experience of colonization was very traumatic. I talk about abortion. I do know that I was in a poetry slam, listened to a poetry slam, and a person brought up the controversial topic of Jesus saving them from homosexuality, and that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. They didn't feel like he should be talking about that. Mansplaining is definitely a thing that happens in poetry and outside. Try to stay away from that. Poems that reflect white savior complex is also a thing that pops up often. In fact, I was teaching an infrastic workshop recently, and we were looking at Black artists and writing about it. And some people expressed that it was difficult for them to engage with this piece because they didn't want to feel like they were talking about subject matter they didn't understand or appropriating the work. And just asking that question, I feel like it is responsible. But we were there to write about it and to have our feelings expressed about what we were looking at. So in that context, I felt like, it was okay for them.
It's interesting that you say that, James. You made me remember that for Spectrum, which is supposed to be 100% accepting, that I did get a poem that was a against gun control. And I knew that a lot of poets would disagree with this poet, but I published it anyway because I wanted everyone to have an equal opportunity to express their point of view. And yeah, it didn't sit so well with some people, but you know, that's life. Everybody has their points.
Mhm.
Go ahead,
Mhm.
sir.
I also know another poetry slam kind of competition where, you know, the individual wrote about illness that they didn't have themselves, but made it seem like the persona they had it.
Oh my, yeah.
And you know, I thought that was a little inappropriate.
That's interesting. I see, I got examples for everything. I'm so old. We had a poet, can I say his name? Can I say his name? I don't know. But he wrote a poem about being a vet and he was never in the war. But he reads the poem and vets are like, yeah. But
Yeah.
it's all a lie.
So, you know, but then, so let me preface that also by saying like I wrote a poem, a persona poem from a Proud Boys perspective, in homage to Patricia Smith's Skinhead poem. And so, you know, that might not sit well with someone, that subject of the Capitol riot and Proud Boys or skinheads.
Have you ever written a parody, like, you know, or a persona poem in someone else's voice meant to be the bad person?
Yeah.
That kind of thing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've done that. And then you read it in public and people are like, wait a minute, you know. And I have to explain, it's persona poems. It's not me, it's persona poem.
Right. There's, you know, there's kind of gray area that, you know, we have to consider being responsible. Last two things I'll talk about. I attempted to write an ode about Latina women. And I took it to a group peers to get reviewed, and it didn't go over so well. The guys thought it was like demeaning to the women because I was talking about like food and culture and dance, and they were like, women are more than that. And I'm like, yeah, of course they're more than that. But and so that poem was really hard to capture a whole culture and not be feel like I was generalizing them. So the poem didn't work. And then I also got like requested to write a poem about big, beautiful women, which I did write for the individual, but I never shared with anyone outside of that individual that requested the poem.
You know, that's a very good point too, James. You can choose your audience, right? You have the power as a poet to choose who you share, what you share with who. That's a very good point. And I'm almost out of time, but I don't want to go without giving you at least the opportunity to read something of yours if you want to.
Yeah, so I'll read this short one. This is out of Midnight and Mad Dreams. And maybe you can figure out the subject matter. What we white out. Father of a child never to be born, taken from me without my consent, a boy or girl I will never get to hear breathe. Mother has all the rights until delivery, taken from me without consent. Part of me disappeared like keys to a future. Father has no rights until delivery. I plant a seed that won't touch daylight. Part of me disappeared like keys to a future. Heart has no room for another passenger. I plant a seed that won't touch daylight. An agony my body will be forced to carry. Heart has no room for another passenger. A boy or girl I will not get to hear breathe. An agony my body will be forced to carry. To father a child never to be born.
How ironic. That is a poem that was meant to be born. I think Marvin will agree with me that he was expressing that philosophy, you know, if it's got to come out of you, it's got to come out. And you let it come out, and that's good therapy, good purging of the soul. Feels good to get it out and you can reflect on it. That's really a great example of writing about something that maybe not everybody's going to agree with you about. But that's, you know, that's your experience. So that's really well done. All right, I'm out of time. I'm very sorry to say I've got to head over to a local college. And I'm very happy to say that. Thank you all for helping out with this episode, and it'll be up later today on YouTube. All right, signing off.